Everybody, thanks for watching. So real quick, we're going to get into this video real fast and talk about what I was saying in the video about the Persians being created and the Arabs being created. So it's something you guys, heard me say, and I talked about a lot of times before, but we've seen the backlash from the live. A lot of people had questions. I got a lot of emails about that. So what I want to do is make sure I go through this, even though I have videos on this, but it's an important thing to understand exactly what I'm saying about this, because it's going to give you a lot of insight into history of what's going on. So understand, the ruling elite want to make sure that they are not the ones being, outed as the problems behind what's taking place with war. So you're going to have, as we see with the Vatican, we see with Rome, we see with these leaders using other weapons to basically conquer. So as I said in the video, the Persians was a creation, right? Just like the Arabs. So if you go and look, you'll see how the Aryans came into the Indus Valley and basically made it with the people in that area. So they call them Indo-Iranians, right? But the Iranians before Aryans came and mixed in, of course, were dark skinned. So if you look at it on the map, you have Africa and you have Iran, right? Which would be considered part of the Middle East. And then after that, you would have the Indus Valley going into India. So history would tell you everybody along that way was obviously dark skinned. So when you have the Aryans come in, they had to mix in with somebody, right? Because white can only make white. And we know the Persians are not white. So they are classified by America as being white. Obviously, they are a mixed race, right? So we're going to get into this because it's going to really open up a lot of understanding into what's happening and what took place in that history. Okay, so with the Persians, right, you have the Persian Empire, and they just basically came out of nowhere when you pay attention. So we understand how the Aryans came down, mixed in with the people of the Indus Valley and in India, and this is where we get the whole history of Hinduism or what have you, which the Aryans claim they created. So we have all this taking place, and then we have what's happening in Kemet, right? So you have the Greeks living with the ancient Egyptians, and the Greeks wanting to rule Egypt. Now, as I always talk about, they can't just come into Kemet and conquer Kemet because you have Greek citizens there, right? The Greeks wouldn't have it. So they had to find a way to basically infiltrate Egypt and conquer. And this is basically what they did when they created the Persians. So the Persian Empire was created. They was basically bred and trained by the Greeks. And again, you have that connection with Alexander and the Persians. So why is it that Alexander has this connection with the Persians? And we see once Alexander took over in the 4th century, they was basically calling him, even though he married into the Persian Empire, but they was already looking for him to be the ruler of the Persian Empire. But understand, it's already before this, as I talked about in the previous video, showing the context between Xerxes and Alexander, which Xerxes, in a letter that we actually have, was claiming to be related to Alexander. So that's a whole other thing. We'll get into that. My whole issue is I want people to understand this creation and what was it meant for. So the Persians basically getting the keys to the kingdom, understanding how Egypt worked. This is how Egypt was conquered because the Greeks gave them that information. And as I always say, why didn't the Greeks give the Egyptian empire back to the Egyptians after they conquered the Persians, right? So something to look at, something to understand. It's not so much that the Persians amassed this, great power and was just smarter because they're newer. The Egyptians was ruling for thousands of years. How did this new civilization of people basically come up, gain power, gain the control and understanding that they had during that time to rival the ancient Egyptians, come into Kemet and conquer Kemet and rule it for so long from the ancient Egyptians? They had to have some inside knowledge to do this. And then on top of that, how did the Greeks easily defeat the Persians if the Persians defeated the ancient Egyptians? It don't make sense. So it also don't make sense that the Egyptians, when the Persian War was happening with the Greeks, that the Egyptian people didn't intervene and basically try to get their land back, because you would think they would join with the Greeks to fight the Persians with the understanding that they would get their land back, which that did not happen. The Greeks kept it and conquered it for a long time, right?
So it says here, according to Herodotus, another motivation that solidified Cambyses'
and it gets pronounced that different ways, expedition into Egypt was Phanes of Halicarnassus, originally a councilman and advisor to Amasis. An unknown course of events led to bitterness developing between them to the point that Amasis sent an Egyptian eunuch after Phanes, which a eunuch is a castrated Egyptian, right? That they basically, if you've seen Game of Thrones, you know what I'm talking about. They castrated these guys for many different reasons, and they was basically warriors that went out and did the dirty work. They was assassins. So a eunuch is basically a castrated person. So Amasis sent an Egyptian eunuch after Phanes, pursuing him to Lydia. Phanes was captured in Lycia, but outwitted his guards by getting them drunk and escaped to Persia, and assisted the Persian king in all manners of strategy, and was instrumental in shaping his resolve for conquest of Egypt. Now, I've been saying this for a long time. I've been telling you guys what I've been saying, that the Greeks gave the Persians the keys to the back door. This is what I'm talking about. Despite having full control over the Neo-Babylonian Empire and its sub-regions, including northern Arabia, Cambyses sent a message to the king of Arabia requesting safe passage through the desert road from Gaza to Pelusium. The Arabian king himself, an enemy of Amasis, and glad to facilitate his destruction, granted safe passage to Cambyses and even supplied him with troops. According to Polybus, even with all the precautions taken on entering the border of Egypt, only the city of Gaza resisted the Persians, which fell after a long siege. When the news of the impending battle reached Egypt, Psamtik III, son and heir of Amasis II, gathered the Egyptian army, stationing it along the fork of the Red Sea and the River Nile. Amasis himself had died 6 months before Cambyses reached Egypt. Psamtik had hoped that Egypt would be able to withstand the threat of the Persian attack by an alliance with the Greeks, but this hope failed, as the Cypriot towns and the tyrant Polycrates of Samos, who possessed a large fleet, now preferred to join the Persians. That one of Egypt's most prominent tactical advisors, Phanes of Halicarnassus, had already gone over to the Persian side, meant that Psamtik was entirely dependent on his own limited military experience. Polycrates sent 40 triarmies to the Persians. Psamtik, in a violent act of revenge prior to the confrontation with the Persian army, arrested all the sons of Phanes and stilled them between two bulls. He then cut them one by one, draining their blood and mixing it with wine. Psamtik then drank of it and made every other councilman drink their blood before the battles. Again, people, I've been telling y'all, the Greeks gave the Persians the keys to the back door to conquer the ancient Egyptians. No matter how you want to slice it, that's what happened. This is what you got to understand. One, they created these people to infiltrate Kemet, so they won't be named as the people who took down Kemet, because then we would know then who the real enemy is. So just like we have today with the Arabs, which again, the Arabs is the same as the Persians. They was basically bred to do what they did. So the Arabs was basically bred to take down the Persian Empire. Remember, the Persians was promised a lot of land once the Greeks took power. They didn't get it. So when Rome came and took power from, the Greeks after the whole Greco-Roman era, there was a deal that was supposed to be done with the Persians that didn't get done because Rome double-crossed them, which is why we had this whole war with the Persians in Rome, which lasted for a while. But in the meantime, the Arabs was basically being bred and created and trained, and they went out, and their job during the beginning was to basically go into African territories and conquer and enslave those people, which is what they did. All right, so it says in Persian history, Alexander is viewed in various ways, including as a destroyer, but also as a legitimate heir to the Persian throne in some narratives. He is even included in the Shamanaya, Persian's historical epic, as a figure of importance, right? So the Persians eventually absorbed Alexander into their national identity, sometimes attributing mythical origins and stories to him. He is depicted as a figure who explored the world in search of the fountain of youth in some accounts, right? Alexander sought to legitimize his rule by incorporating Persian practices and figures, such as marrying a Persian princess and promoting Persians within his administration. His conquest led the foundation for a Hellenistic world, which included the eastern territories he conquered, eventually ruled by the Seleucid dynasty. So you gotta understand, the Persians were basically created, as I said, to infiltrate in Kemet. And then we have this whole rule of the Persian rule in Kemet, which we know a civil war broke out that I talked about with Herodotus, broke this whole civil war down because it's something that the Greeks had basically talked about, had basically put in their histories, Herodotus at least. So this is going to help the Black Hebrew Israelites understand where the context comes from, where all this comes in at. Because the whole thing is, we know the ancient Egyptians was Black. We know the people in this area were all Black, and they're trying to figure out, how did this thing happen? When did the spread occur? So you have to then look at the Persian Empire and look at the conquest that happened in Kemet and understand that this was a setup from the beginning. Now, I talked about when you had the Greco-Roman era, when you had the Greeks and the Romans creating gods for the ancient Egyptians to worship, right? All right, so for the Hebrew Israelites, the Black Hebrew Israelites, this is important to understand when you're going into looking up that whole history of what happened with Kemet. Because as I said, remember, they want to talk about how the Jews migrated over, right? And how somehow the Persian Empire skipped over these people. I talked about this in my last video. It don't make sense for the Persians to be on a conquest of Kemet, know where they're going to go towards Kemet, and miss over 1 million Jews. It's no way. So again, I broke that whole thing down with the Cyrus cylinder and how it does not say anything about Hebrews or Jews. It never mentions Hebrews or Jews. It's basically talking about anybody, right? So anybody could have basically been implicated in what the Cyrus cylinder is saying about people being able to return home, because there was a lot going on in Persia around this time as well. None of it pertaining to the Jews, which is why they wasn't mentioned. You got to understand, these people was created for that reason, to basically go in and take Kemet from the Egyptians, right? And what happened later, as I said, Alexander, he married, and then eventually he dies, and then they basically assume control of Kemet, never giving it back to the Egyptian people, right? So again, as I said, I showed you guys where Serapis comes in, where the Greeks and Romans created Serapis to basically, indoctrinate the people. And he is found in Rome as well. So we see this whole thing. Then we have now the Arabs being used, because once Rome is established, right, it's on already. They're already going out. They're conquering African lands, right? And then now Rome has to go into these other African lands, these other parts of Northern Africa and what's considered the Middle East. They need another army to do it. The Persians learned their lesson. They are no longer fucking with these people, right? So now we need the Arabs to come in. The Arabs take out the Persians, right? And then now the Arabs are going to come in and clean up and do what the Persians used to do, which is what they did. We talk about that over 1,000 years of slavery under the Arab Empire, right? So the Arabs come in, they enslave these Africans and take these African lands from Black people, from Africans, and then Rome ends up with it, which is why, again, we look at the whole Roman conquest map. We see Northern Africa, we see all these lands. This would include going all the way over to Morocco and seeing what happened there and how Morocco basically became, what it was for the Moors. So it's the same thing. So Persian people don't like to be called Arabs. Arab people don't like to be called Persians for that reason. And so you got to understand, like, these people are a mixture. As I said before, white people, U.S. Census, classifies everybody in Northern Africa, including the Black people, as being white. You can look it up. I showed you guys. Here it is right here. You can see it. They classify these people as being white, including the Persians, for a reason. So it says here, while Persians may be categorized as white in some contexts, like the U.S. Census, this is a broad racial category that doesn't necessarily reflect their distinct ethnic identity and mixed ancestry, right? In conclusion, Persians are an ethnic group with a distinct cultural identity, but they also have a mixed ancestry due to a history of migrations and interactions with other groups in the region. The concept of mixed race, as understood in some contexts, especially in the US, may not accurately apply to the complex history and identity of Persians. So what does all that mean? It don't fucking matter. It just means that they mixed, right? That's all you have to worry about. They're mixed. That mean Aryans came down, bred with somebody to create these people. They are trained by the Greeks, right? People are coming in there training and developing this civilization. There's no way a civilization can amass that much power and wealth without any help